even backstitch and its applications. At the end of the session, you will be able to sew an even backstitch, determine the applications of the even backstitch, how to do an even backstitch. In 4 quick steps, let me show you the basics of sewing an even backstitch. Step 1. Make 1 stitch. Step 2. Bring the needle back through to the top of the fabric. Step 3. Now pass the needle backwards through the end hole of the previous stitch. Step 4. This makes a continuous line of stitches. Now that you have seen the basic movement of the needle and thread in an even backstitch, now let's see in detail for better understanding. Step 1. Thread your needle and tie a knot at the end of the thread. Step 2. You will be working from right to left unless you are left-handed. So start from the right. Insert the needle into the fabric at a point, leaving space for 1 stitch, and bring your thread to the front and pull it through completely till the knot secures the beginning of the stitch. You're starting by leaving 1 space because, as the name suggests, you will go backwards to take stitches as you go along the line forward. Step 3. Take your needle to the back 1 stitch length to the right from where your thread emerges, pass the needle underneath the fabric and re-emerge on the surface of the fabric on the other side of the thread at approximately the same distance. Step 4. Pull your thread through and then take your needle to the back through the same hole where the first stitch ends. Re-emerge on the other side at the same distance. Thus you can see that the back stitch is made by taking a short stitch back on the upper side and a longer one forward on the underside of the material, bringing the needle out a space in advance. The stitches meet each other as the needle is then inserted into the end hole of the previous stitch, then passing it under the material and out again a space in advance of the last stitch taken. Step 5. Continue along until you reach the end of the line. Step 6. Take your last stitch to the back through the hole at the end of the previous stitch and weave in the end on the back of the fabric. To tie off, take a small stitch and pass the needle through the loop and tighten the knot. Repeat the step to secure the thread, then cut the thread. This is what the finished line looks like. And this is how it looks on the back, sort of woven. Thus the even backstitch is produced in a series simulating machine sewing, with no space between stitches on the face ply and overlapping stitches on the under ply. The samples shown are sewn with contrasting thread for visibility. You would normally sew with a thread color that matches the fabric color as closely as possible if you're making the seams. But for embroidery, you would choose the thread color as per the design. Now let's see the applications of the even backstitch. As you've already learned, the backstitch is a strong stitch since each stitch overlaps the last stitch on the back of the fabric. This stitch is ideal for seams. Backstitches make small, tight, strong seams by joining 2 pieces of fabric together. It is used wherever firm hand sewing is necessary. Moreover, it is not seen on the right side of the garment. So it is commonly used to setting sleeves and particularly good for areas in which you don't want too much stretch, like shoulder seams. It is used to replace machine stitches that have broken, that is to do repairs. As it is a strong stitch, a whole garment can be made with a backstitch. The backstitch is used to secure the beginning and end of a permanent row of hand stitching. Fasten permanent hand stitching with a short backstitch. Use a long backstitch to secure temporary stitches that will be removed. This backstitch serves to secure hand stitching. It can be used as a decorative stitch for embroidery too. With that, we've come to the end of this session. Before we conclude, let's recall what we have learnt in this session. You have learnt how to sew an even backstitch. The backstitch is made by taking a short stitch back on the upper side and a longer one forward on the underside of the material, bringing the needle out a space in advance. The stitches meet each other as the needle is then inserted into the end hole of the previous stitch, then passing it under the material and out again a space in advance of the last stitch taken. We have also learned the applications of the even backstitch. It is ideal for seams, example setting sleeves, shoulder seams. Make a whole garment, to secure the beginning and end of a permanent row of hand stitching, and for embroidery too. Before I take your leave, a note to remember. As with any skill, the more you practice, the more the skill becomes your second nature. Take our next session to learn about the half backstitch.